Hello, hey everybody. I can see that people are joining, so I suppose that everything works. Welcome to this webinar. I'm really happy to see you all here. I know it's been quite a while since we had our last one. I think the last webinar that we had was August or September last year. A lot of the things changed, but yeah, happy to be here with you once again. And also welcome to those of you who are new to Localise webinars. Let's take this time to wait for everybody to join and settle in the meantime, I would really love somebody to write something in the chat box. There is a chat icon at the bottom, so maybe you can write where you're joining from to make sure that you can hear me well and everything is working as it should. So I see that, yeah, there are some people joining from Ukraine, Switzerland, Netherlands, all over the world. Actually, yeah, quite a few people from Europe. I know it's quite a late hour for you guys. And also, yeah, obviously some people from the US, Brazil. Happy to see all of you here, guys. As I said, let's take one more minute probably to make sure that other guys join as well. And then we can kick the things off. In the meantime, I would really like you also to basically answer a question that we've prepared for you. So we are planning to make this a more regular webinar series, and we've prepared a couple of polls to make the webinar a bit more interactive and also to hear your thoughts on some of the questions that we were interested to ask. So basically, I will run the poll now, and you should see like the poll pop up appear, and then you would be able to answer the question, I believe. Cool. Yeah. So the poll is now launched now, and I think we can slowly start with some ground rules for this webinar. So basically, as I've already said, there is a chat box at the bottom of your screen. There is also a so-called Q&A section, and I really encourage to use this section if you want to ask any questions. We have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so we'll try to take on all of the questions at the very end. But feel free to ask those as we go, because we might touch upon some topics, and you might be having some of these questions in the course of the webinar. I also have my colleague today with me, Emils, who will be assisting me with taking, maybe some more technical questions related to some audio, video quality, etc., etc. So he will be able to answer those on the spot, and he will act as a helping hand for me here, and will act as a moderator in this webinar. So I see that, yeah, we have quite some people who've joined the webinar already, so more than 50. And yeah, I believe we can slowly start. I will lay out first the agenda for today. So our topic of the webinar is starting the localization at the design stage. And let me quickly share my screen, and please also let me know in the chat if you can see what I'm sharing. So I would really appreciate you leaving the comment in the chat box to make sure that yeah, so I see that people say that this works. Perfect. So we've done our setup right. That's a good thing to start with. And as I've said, the webinar for today is starting the localization and translation at the design stage. And really, that's we feel that that's quite a hot topic at the moment in the industry. And that's why we really wanted to focus on this theme first. And the agenda for today is that first of all, I will run you through quite a quick presentation. I will focus on the traditional localization workflow in the agile software development at the point it's done now. I will also touch upon the costs associated with fixing some localization bugs which are inevitable in this instance. And then I will focus on the new process, on the new way of doing the localization when you actually start one step ahead of the more standardized workflow that we see quite common across the companies. And after that, I will dive into the demo of the Figma plugin that we've recently launched. I will show you all the ins and outs and how it works. And finally, we will have some questions for the Q&A. Okay, so without further ado, let's kick the things off. So basically, the traditional localization workflow for the agile teams who are involved in the software localization involves a couple of stakeholders. These are the developers, managers, for example, product managers, project managers, or localization managers, depending on the company they work for, translators, reviewers, and maybe some other stakeholders like QA teams, etc. But really the most common workflow that we see across the customers who want to really focus on the continuous software localization is something that you see on the screen, and that involves all these people. So basically, product teams conveys their user stories to the development team, who are later on actually writing the code. And as soon as the code is written and they want to localize their content, they're supplying the source to the managers, the product managers, or localization managers. And these are the people who really use some resources that they have, for example, translation memory, etc., and assign some tasks to the translators and distribute the work among other people. Translators naturally do what they're best at, is translate the stuff, again, using the resources available, using the context if it is provided. And then the localization moves into the next stage, which is the revision and QA process, where reviewers and QA teams actually review the content, make some post corrections, and then as soon as this step is done, then the translated content, translated files are pushed wherever they need to be pushed in order for the developers to deploy the feature or the product in multiple languages. This is there are lots of steps that you can automate here, which is cool, but there are some issues as well in this workflow. And let me quickly show you a more let me zoom out a little bit and show you all the other steps that are involved in this traditional process. So at first, again, designers actually create the UI, right? And there is some work involved before the step when developers enter. Copywriters finalize the content in the source language, and then obviously the feature goes into the development. There is some testing done as well. And then the feature is released in one market. And there are some benefits in this process, obviously. So the time to release for the, one market, one language is faster, because you don't have to spend all of this time on translating the content to other markets. And the user love it. The user love the feature. They're raving about your new product or your new feature. And they give you the positive feedback, which makes you think, probably I should roll it out to other languages as well. And as soon as you decide on this process, then the feature copy is translated to all the other languages. Developers basically pull the translations to the product, then the process that I've described previously kicks in. And once the translations are pulled to the product, there are some issues that arise. So for example, designs break. The user interface. There is some product crashes due to the localization bugs that you've encountered. Then obviously it results in the negative feedback from the users of other markets, because they are frustrated with some of the issues that appear. There is some grammar and spelling mistakes, perhaps because in a lot of the instances still we see that some customers do not provide the thorough context to their translators, and that's why there is grammar issues that are that users see, and all of that basically involves the increase in costs, because as we will discover it a bit later on, the further you delay the localization process, the higher are the costs associated with that. So what are those costs? And we've really spent some time to focus on some existing customer cases that we have, some customers that we work closely with, and also research some resources, some sources available online to really educate ourselves how much really does it cost to, you know, fix some localization bugs. And obviously we've made some assumptions here. So we've taken some, you know, averages, some benchmarks in the industry. So for example, we've assumed that the number of releases that you have, your company have per year is 12. So you have a release scheduled every month. There is the average, let's say we've taken the average a product, which is an iOS and Android app, which if it's not too complicated, but again, not too simple, it might consist of 100,000 lines of code. Then there are 35 bugs per 1,000 line of code. Again, some of that, like a benchmark that we found out on the internet. And we really took the time to calculate how much it will cost for some key people who are involved in the process of fixing this localization bugs and testing them once again. And obviously these are not all the stakeholders that are involved here, but some, you know, core stakeholders that we see are involved in company to company. And these are the localization product manager, the vendor LQA, the core QA team, and taking some averages of cost per hour of these resources in Europe, we end up with the costs of a bit more than $50,000 per year spent on you know, just fixing the localization bugs. And not only that, we also found out that the increase in costs is closely tied to the time when these bugs actually appear. So as you can see per this chart here, there is up to 10 times cost decrease if you resolve a bug at an earlier stage, at the design stage, as opposed to, for example, after your product or feature is released. And that's quite a drastic increase. So for example, if we go one slide back, if we can reduce this number just to 5,000, and obviously maybe spend a bit extra time at the design stage, then it provides us a way better return on investment that we make. So what about this new process? A new process, new way to do localization. As we see it, it also encompasses some other stakeholders that previously were not that maybe interested and not that involved in the localization process per se. So these are the designers, these are the copywriters as well, who are now brought up to the mix and are on the same page as all the other stakeholders that were previously also involved in the localization process. So looking a bit more granularly on this new process, how we see it and how what we've spotted among some customers who utilize these workflows is that designers usually are the ones who are creating, not only creating the design of the UI, but also creating the keys from the text elements and pushing them to a TMS system which has the integrations with the design tools like Localise, for example. We have an integration with Figma and Sketch as well. Then copywriters are the people who might work inside the tool to finalize the copy of the source. And again, there is some back and forth, obviously, between the designers and copywriters, but with a single tool, it's way more, and especially with a single tool, which is of a collaborative nature, the experience is way more smoother. Then translators are put into the mix, and they can provide some high quality translations thanks to the context that was provided, because as you will see a bit later on, whenever the designers are pushing the designs to localize, they're not only creating the keys from the text elements, but they're also providing the context, the screenshots, which tell translators where exactly the string appears on the design of the app. Translations are then pulled back to the design tool, because obviously some languages, like German, for example, they are linked here, and therefore the design might need to be adjusted in some cases. There are also right to left languages that we need to take care of. And again, it might change the way the design should be done in this case. Or again, it might dictate that translators actually need to abide some rules like the character limits, which again is something that, for example, you can set up with Localise on a key level, and make sure your translators do not exceed the character limit that they're working with. So going further into the stages, so designer reviews and optimizes the UI, feature goes into the development, developers pull the translated files, the feature is tested across multiple languages, across multiple locales, and then it's released simultaneously in a couple of markets, which results in a positive feedback because you've taken some steps before that to prepare the product for a proper localization in the different markets. And there is some really benefits that outweigh the negatives here. Obviously, one negative that we can identify here is that it will take a bit more time to translate everything to multiple languages. But other benefits, like immediately releasing in a couple of markets, getting the positive feedback and eliminating some issues in this process, decreasing the costs of then fixing localization bugs. That's pretty impressive. And not only that, you can use your translators, your LSPs, or whoever you work with, as as a first point of the feedback. Not your customers, but the internal stakeholders or your partners would be able to provide some feedback, for example, regarding some colors, UIs, etc., which might result in some cultural conflicts as well. That's also quite important. And if we speak about Localise and how this flow works within our solution, basically, as I've already mentioned, it's possible to push the strings and screenshots from the tool like Figma, for example. And we are also working on a couple more design tools to be integrated with our system. Then the whole work happens in the Localise itself. You see the project managers, product managers, translators, reviewers, all the copywriters, all these other stakeholders and people who work inside the tool to make the things happen. Then you have a bidirectional sync with your code repository. And after that, obviously, you're deploying your product, and you can use the mobile SDK that Localise provides to do some over-the-air translations and bypass the Apple Store or Google Play Market, or you can also deploy it straight from the code repository to your website or web app or whatever it is. And we have some customers who have been using these workflows already and who have some positive feedback to say in this regard. What they found out is the decreased time to market, increased copy quality as well, and some real-time updates and less mistakes is something that they've seen and they've proved to be working with their workflows. And speaking about the integration that I'm about to show, the Figma integration. So the flow between Localise and Figma is pretty seamless. So you can see the diagram on your screen. Again, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, the new keys are created with the source text and the screenshot. It's also possible to link the keys, link the text elements with the existing keys if you already have your project set up in Localise. Then once the strings are translated, the translations are pulled back to Localise, and designers make sure that they adapt into the user interface. So before that's about it in terms of the presentation. I'm about to show you now the demo itself, but maybe before we proceed to the demo, I actually wanted to run another poll that we believe is a pretty important one as well. And yeah, I've actually didn't share the results of the first one, so let me do that quickly. So yeah, let's first focus on the results from the first poll. So as we can see there, the predominant majority of the customers say that they consider themselves to be beginners in the localization workflow, in localization workflow maturity. And yeah, we see a lot of the companies who might be successful companies who are just still starting out to roll out into the new markets to scale. So that's pretty impressive stats that we see here. So only a handful of people consider themselves to be quite advanced in terms of the workflow, localization workflow maturity. So that's pretty interesting. And let me quickly run another poll that I've prepared. And as I've said, we are actually planning to make this webinar series a bit more frequent. And we are really interested in understanding what are the topics that you would like to hear about. So I'm about to launch a poll now. And let's quickly see what you guys think about the different themes that we are able to cover during this webinar series. So let's wait for a couple of seconds for people to complete the poll. Right, so I see quite a few people already answered, and it seems like the majority is interested in common workflows in Localise demo. So some demos of the common workflows that we see among customers which are proved to be working, and also best practices for localization for those starting from scratch. So that's pretty interesting, and that kind of nicely links to the first poll that we've been running of the localization workflow maturity. So I will keep it. No, I think we don't have any new answers. So let me perhaps end the poll here and share the results with you. Here we go. So now, yeah, you should see the results on your screen. And basically, as I've already pointed out, two of the outliers here are the common workflows in Localise demos, and also the localization best practices for those who are starting out. And also there is some interest in the in-depth integration overviews, which might be another topic that we can consider working on. Cool stuff. So let me stop sharing the poll. And again, if, for example, you're interested in this poll results, and if you want to share it, for example, with your team or with your, let's say, management, then let me know after the webinar or in the chat, and we'll be able to share those with you as well. So let me stop sharing the poll now, and let me now share my other screen to show you the demo. Right, so you should see my screen now. Just, let me know also in the chat so that I can make sure that you can actually see the screen pretty well. Cool, yeah, I see that some people are typing in that it works. And one more thing, let me actually do the new share, because I will be switching between the screens. So let me share the entire desktop. So yeah, if you don't mind, can you please also let me know once again if it's working, because I will be sharing the whole desktop, as I will be switching between the platforms, between Localise and Figma. Okay, cool. So I can see that people are typing that everything is working. All right, so now, I'm located in the Localise dashboard, main dashboard, and we have some projects that we've already configured for this demo. And let me switch to actually the Figma plugin and open up the project that I've prepared for this particular demo. It's loading now. So on this project, we have two screens, right? So we have a login screen and we have a search results screen. And what we will do now, we will kind of run through the whole workflow. So I will quickly show you how the project looks inside Localise itself. Let me open it up. So as you can see now in this project, we only have two keys, and there are no screenshots, no keys, and no strings of the text elements that we see here in Figma. So what we'll do now, we'll authorize the Figma plugin, Localise. and we will configure it from scratch. So I will disconnect this project and I will go through all the steps with you so that you can see how it's configured. So first we need to connect to our project in Localise. In our case, it's this one, new project Figma. Then you have to define your Figma design language. So in our case, it's English. You have to also define the platform for the newly created keys. So basically the designs on which you are working on. So in our case, it's an iOS app. Decide on the default key naming pattern. So this will be used as a base for the keys created in Localise. So the naming pattern, how they will be created. So it's artboard, group, and element name. So I won't actually change it, but there is some other variations that you can use. I will finish the setup. And now we have authenticated with our project, and we can push the screens that we've already designed. So actually, it's also possible to select some elements here, but I won't do that. And maybe one more thing to mention, when you're selecting the elements, it's also possible to override the key names, which is pretty important in some of the instances. But in my case, I am fine with the key namings, with the key naming pattern that I've selected, and I will push all the screens and text elements to Localise. So I will click push. Here, the window opens up where I can, again, play around with some settings. I won't go into too much details about each of those here, but basically, since we're creating the new keys, we want to make sure that create missing keys in Localise is marked. We will also tag these keys to later on filter out with the Figma tag, and we will update the screenshot, meaning in this case, we'll just push the screenshot to Localise. So let's click proceed. And as you can see, 9 new keys have been created, 9 elements have been linked. So let me now switch over to Localise and let me refresh the page here. And as you can see now, we have a couple of more keys which have been pushed from Figma to Localise. And what I can do now, I can filter out the keys by screenshot here in the editor. I can either filter out just the keys which have the screenshot, or for example, I can filter out all the keys that I see on this screenshot here, which is basically our search screen. So only the keys which are included in this search screen. And what I can do now, I will actually leverage, because I was translating the screens previously, I will leverage the translation memory to pre-translate all the strings with 100% matches. And by the way, one more thing that I actually haven't mentioned is also that the English United States, in this case, was pre-translated because I've set up some autofill rules to autofill the English United States based on my base language value. So let me pre-translate all the other languages, which is German and French in our case, with 100% translation memory matches, meaning that I've already translated it in the past. So let me quickly do that. And let me now also focus on the second screen and do the same here. So this process is being run, on the background, but as you can see now, all the translations have been filled in. Let me actually focus on a couple of things here. So let me first find a couple of strings, for example, in French that I really want to change. I don't. It might I'm not happy with the translation. So for example, in this case, so all results here, we have this translation, but I want to have something more concise, like this one, for example, here. And so the next step that we will do now, we will pull all the translations back to Figma, sorry, so the designer can actually look and see how this fit into the user interface. So let's go back. As you can see here, I'm able, so I have my different languages. I can pull all, first of all, I can switch the languages here, and I'm able to pull all the updates that I've made in Localise. So when switching the languages, as you can see, the language on my screens has changed. So I have some German language here. I also have, let's change to French. I also have my French translations here. And let's say, for example, that if I will switch back to German, actually everything looks good in this case. But let's change, for example, this button, one of these buttons here in Localise, and assume that it has broken the user interface. So let me filter out everything by the screenshot here. And for example, in this case, or maybe in this case, yeah, some translation were way, way longer. I will just type in some random words here because I don't really know the German language. And let's pull the translation back to Localise, or sorry, to Figma in the German language. And as you can see now, for example, this string here, it's not really fitting my UI. So again, I can do some job as a designer to either change the UI, or I can tell my my translator to make some changes. And for example, in this case, we'll just remove this word here. And as I've said, it's also possible to enforce some character limits to make sure that translators don't go over this limit. And we're planning to include it also in the Figma push as well, so that you can define the character limits. So let's go back and let's assume that the designer actually decided to create a new text element within the design and link it with the existing key that is existing in the project. So let me quickly change the color here to white. So let's say we have created this new text here, and we really want to link it to some existing elements that we have in Localise. So as you can see here, there's a button link on link. There are no matching translations at the moment, but if I type something like login, then you will see that there is some suggestions that are actually linked to maybe some other text element in my case, but they can actually link to this this string here that I've added, this text element that I've added. So now it's linked with this key name, and again I can push everything once again and update the screenshots, update everything with the modified text as well. And as you can see, one translation was updated. So let me remove this filter here, login. Let me maybe type the new key. So yeah, here is the new key. And again, we've changed the language actually in the German, and this screenshot has been attached. So that's in a nutshell how the Figma and Localise integration works. I'm a bit cautious of the time. We still have to spend some time on the Q&A itself. But before jumping into the Q&A, so the very last thing that I wanted to mention is that in case you are interested in Localise Figma demo, right? Then you can email us at hello@localise.com, and basically one of our sales or our CS colleagues will pick it up. Let me quickly actually open up on the screen the last slide here, so that you see the email on your screen. So yeah, that's it from me today. As I've said, if you're interested in the Figma plugin, or if you're interested in any other features that I've shown you today, or any just like a Localise trial, etc., then just simply email hello@localise.com, and one of our sales or customer success colleagues will be able to answer it. So let me open up the Q&A section and see who has asked what. So we have 7 questions here, and I will answer those in the order. So one of the first questions is, what is LSP? So LSP is a language service provider. Basically, there are some companies who are providing basically not only the translation agencies who translate for the specific language, right? But they provide some language services in general. They make sure that They pick up the right translator for your translators for your project. They pick up the right reviewers. They also have some QA teams, and they are able to make sure that you achieve the highest possible results, the higher possible quality with the translation workflow. All right, so the second one, did you develop plugin for Figma internally? Can it be tested, purchased? Can your plugin extract strings for translation in CAT tools and import them back into Figma format after translation? If so, does it extract strings in chronological order? So quite a few questions from the Philip. Basically, this plugin is a part of our product. It's not an internal solution. It's something that our customers can use. It can be tested, and obviously it can be purchased as well, as I've mentioned before. So speaking about some separate CAT tools on the market, then our plugin doesn't work with them. But we have some CAT functionalities in Localise already. So you can use Localise as a solution to both cater for your needs in terms of synchronizing the Figma with our TMS, and also using Localise as a CAT tool for your translators who would be able to make the translation work inside of the Localise. Adrian is asking, we're planning to use the Figma plugin to generate 2 versions of our screen mockups, German mockups to create clickable prototypes for user testing with our German-speaking user base, English mockups for international development team that does not speak German. Would that make sense? Absolutely, yes. I think that you can use the Figma plugin to work with this both German and English mockups. And as I've said, you can, again, if you're using because I didn't quite get from your question, if you're using the German as a base language in your product or the English as a base language in your product, in any case, you can use it in a similar fashion as I've shown you, or you can also reach out to us and our guys will be able to help to maybe tailor the workflow a little bit to make sure it caters for your needs. Philip is asking, is API available to check about integration with other CAT tools? So the short answer is yes. So we have actually some customers who use Localise sort of as a repository for their translations, but they work with some, again, LSPs who rely on some other CAT tools on the market. And it's possible to set up a pretty sophisticated integration between Localise and a CAT tool to make sure that you exchange, for example, the XLIF files. So that's absolutely possible. But again, as I've already mentioned, you can also use Localise as a CAT solution as well. And that's actually a recommended thing because then everybody is on the same tool, as I've said. Designers, developers, translators, reviewers, copywriters, etc. And you can leverage, for example, the chat in Localise to collaborate and tag each other and work really seamlessly. Christian is asking, can I select multiple platforms, for example, Android and iOS? That's a very good question, Christian. So this is something that we'll make available in one of our next iterations of the Figma plugin. Justin is asking, does your Figma integration support inline formatting? For example, what happens with a string that contains multiple different types of formatting, such as color, bold, italics, etc.? Also, very good question, Justin. And this is something that our team is addressing. And again, that will be available in one of the next iterations of the Figma plugin. But at this time, basically, it's not supported. Only the text element goes into the Localise. But once this will be developed, then you will see also the inline formatting as well. Karen is asking, what is TM that he used to fill the other languages? He mentioned translation memory that only exists if the same English value have been translated before. That's correct, Karen. So let's assume that you're working on multiple projects within the Localise environment, right? And all of the translations that you make and you execute, this can be saved to the translation memory that can be enabled in Localise. And basically, it's sort of the history of all the translations that you've done. And you can then leverage that in order to pre-translate something that you've previously translated. Or you can also use the inline suggestions in the Localise editor, which will tell you, for example, you have a 77% match. I think I was clicking through some translations in the editor and you were able to spot that as well. Christian is asking, is it possible to have the same translation associated with iOS and Android at the same time from Figma? So I really think that I've already answered this question previously. As I said, we are working on it. How about developing a way to export contextual info for keys to send to translators that do not want to translate inside Localise? So I don't really get what you mean here by contextual information. But as I've said, one of the workflows for you might be that you will actually use Localise for syncing up with Figma. And if your translators still prefer other CAD tool, it can be integrated via the API. But again, that's not necessarily the recommended solution, because then you're losing on some functionalities that we have to offer inside Localise for the translators as well, which is again, the glossary, the translation memory, and everything that comes with a pretty standard CAD tool. What does CAD stand for? So CAD is a computer assisted translation system. That's what is a CAD tool. So I'm a bit cautious of time. I see that we have a couple of more questions. I will try to address all of them, but if I don't address some of them, then we will answer those afterwards in a written format. So Adrian is asking, we often have copies of the same screens or slight variations in our design files for A/B testing or during design stage. How do we avoid chaos and make sure we do not add too many keys and duplicates to Localise? So first of all, it's possible to link the duplicates when you're pushing something to Localise so that it's merged to one key, essentially. That's one way to work with that. The second way would be pretty sophisticated workflow. So I've shown you the simple project, but you can also create a project with multiple branches. If you're familiar with the Git, then you know what branches are. And then you can decide to which branch you push your designs, and it can be different variations, for example, of the designs, and then you can merge them together afterwards, merge them to the master branch, for example. Does it work with instances from team library as well? Not really sure about this question. Seems like this is something a bit more, as I understand, team library is something like on the Figma side, right? If that's the case, then yeah, I will have to dig deeper into that. I won't be able to answer on the spot. Chris is asking, could you automate a sync round trip so that designers and a design team could self-serve working only with Figma, within Figma? I'd like to set up designers to obtain some form of translations into their designs on their own without localization team involvement. Well, that's an interesting take on that. I honestly think that's not the best way to do that, because you know, translators might translate the text, but it might not be in, you know, they might translate some strings, but then come back to them and polish them in a sense. That's usually how translators are working. So then whenever the translation is populated, if it will be synced back to Figma, it might mislead the designer. So that's why we really suggest that designer has a license within Localise. And for example, designer is tagged whenever the you know, translations are done. Or again, you can also set up inside Localise some notifications that go to the Slack channel. So for example, whenever the translation task is completed, you assign a task to the translators, they complete the task, and then your designer gets a notification in Slack, and he knows that he or she knows that they can click on this on the pull button in Figma without going into the Localise and pull the translation back. Christian is asking, yeah, so I'd like to set up design template. Yeah, sorry. Kristen is asking, we have had some problems for integrating the SDKs in iOS and Android. Is it possible that the SDK will be published in GitHub to be able to raise the issue? Kristen, in this case, just reach out to, again, the same email, and then our support guys will pick it up and they will help you to resolve the issues. And our support is pretty responsive. They respond within the minutes and solve pretty complex technical questions. And the last question that I will take, Karen is asking, we're redesigning our app. That means we have Localise full of keys and translations, but since the design is now different, then I would like to start matching keys early by using Figma plugin. Do you have suggestions how to match keys quickly if they're not an exact match? The redesigned designs tried to make copy better this time. That's a pretty interesting one. I think, yeah, Karen, I would suggest reaching out again to our team, and perhaps somebody from the customer success team um, would be able to assist you on this matter and suggest what would be the best way to go forward with it. So that's it in terms of the questions that I see. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. As I said, we are planning to make it a more regular series. We'll definitely look into the poll answers that we've received from you to decide on what would be the next topics. And once again, it was a pleasure to reconnect with you, have another webinar finally. And I wish you everybody a great rest of the day, and stay tuned with the new updates from Localise. Take care. Bye-bye.